All right, thanks for tuning in here. We're going to be checking in on the Amano shrimp breeding setups here, and also taking a look at a brand new breeding project that I've got in the works for Longfin Celestial Pearl Danio. So first, what we're looking at here is some 2.5 gallon Aqueon open top aquariums. They've got lids on them, but that's what they're referred to as Aqueon open top. Yes, this is the Aqueon cheapy aquariums that are typically on sale at Petco or PetSmart for about $12 each. And these little inexpensive, no-tech setups are how I breed my adult Amano shrimp. I keep 5 of the best color adults in these 2.5 gallon tanks, and it's from those females that I produce all my baby Amano shrimp larvae. So here in this first tank, we have snow Amano shrimp. In the second one, I have sun orange Amano shrimp that I'm breeding selectively to try to get them more red. There's not currently, I guess, a hobby name for red Amano shrimp, so I just call them red Amano shrimp. And last but not least, we have the most popular of the colorful Amano shrimp varieties currently available, and that is the lemon yellow Amano shrimp. And in each of these tiny nano planted aquariums, I have 5 adult Amano shrimp. So that's 2 males and 3 females per 2.5 gallon tank. And as you can see, there's no air setup. There is a filter in there, but that's more or less surface area for seed shrimp and for the Amano shrimps themselves to kind of pick around. I'll zoom in here on how I've got these sponge filters set up. This one obviously has pearlweed growing in it, and I keep the pearlweed somewhat trimmed down. Once it starts getting close to the top of the 2.5 gallon tank, I'll trim it down. Let me move this camera up just a little bit here. So this pearlweed, oh, camera move right back down. This pearlweed grows very well in decent lighting conditions. I have tried growing it in a tank next to a window with no planted aquarium light on it, and it grows, but it doesn't grow very well. So as long as you've got a good LED plant light, if you want a plant to grow that'll just fill in like a bush, you can use it as a carpeting plant. You can use it to fill in an entire background and grow it a foot tall. Pearlweed is a really, really easy plant, and it'll grow floating. As you can see here, if you can wedge it behind something or against something, eventually, if it can, it'll attach to that surface. And so what we see on my sponge filters here, this next one is a better example. The roots actually go through the sponge. So I thought that was pretty cool. And the roots are able to feed from the water column within the sponge, which, as you know, is already trapping a bunch of detritus and stuff like that, even though there's no air running through it. I have gone in recently and taken out a lot of the snails. Obviously, there's still some snails in here. And I've been trying to smash the limpets just to reduce the amount of living organisms in here that are competing with these Amano shrimp. The background of these breeder tanks is just black paper. It's not even painted, it's just black paper. And at the time I started these tanks, I wish I would have spray painted the underside black and the back black and just gone with no substrate aquariums, because it would be easier to remove the detritus. And I'll show you here in a second what that looks like. But I went with black aqua soil, and there's only enough aqua soil in here. I'll get you a little closer. But there's only enough aqua soil in here to cover the bottom of the aquarium. It's like one layer of individual pieces of substrate. And I did that just to cut down on the glare My reasoning for going with aqua soil was specifically because it is very dark black color and it would make the color of these shrimp pop a little bit more. But as far as detritus removal goes, I have not yet removed any detritus at all from these aquariums. And the shrimps pick at it quite a bit, but there's also like a really, really healthy population of seed shrimp in these aquariums. And I've seen a detritus worm or two in here, but nothing too crazy. You know, the hobby likes to, especially on social media, make everything extreme. And so they'll tell you things like if you don't vacuum the gravel, it's going to be full of detritus worms. It just depends on the situation. You can never speak for all aquariums with these blanket statements, but I've been lucky that this hasn't turned into some weird detritus worm factory. Now, I think most of that is due to the fact that there's not a lot of leftover food all the time in here for detritus worms to thrive on, because these Amano shrimp are very aggressive eaters. And as you can see on that moss dome there, I'll focus in on it. I've got some orange eye Neocaridina shrimp in here also. But don't be alarmed. Even though these are 2.5 gallon aquariums and they do have 5 adult Amano shrimp in them, there's only, in this tank, I think there's just 2 of these Neocaridina shrimp. I put them in there as babies, hatchlings basically, just to add, you know, something else to come up on film as we look at these tanks. The other one, it looks like, is here in the front. Oh, this one might have 3 in there. It looks like there's 3. So behind these 2.5 gallon aquariums, I've got a 20 tall setup that my main colony of orange eye Neocaridina shrimp is in. But I just added a couple of the babies to this just to mix it up a little bit. But as you can see, we've got some ram's horn snails here. There's a pink one right here on the front of the glass. And I've taken out a majority of them. As you probably know, these ram's horn snails and also bladder snails, which I also have some in here. Let's see, there's one right here. Both of these types of snails typically come up to the top of the aquarium a couple times a day to get air. So I just pick them out with aquascaping forceps. And here's one of those. It looks like a Cyclops, actually. There's a Cyclops. There's a lot of those in these tanks because there's no predators. I don't have any fish in here. So you saw that little Cyclops. There's a, if you can even see it, that is a tiny, tiny baby, whatchamacallit. That's a tiny baby whatchamacallit. Ooh, lost the focus. So those baby whatchamacallits, they turn into a little bit bigger whatchamacallits than that. I can't remember what they're called, but they're kind of annoying. They don't hurt anything. They actually keep the glass a little cleaner. They keep a little bit more of that film off the glass, but they're kind of annoying when it comes to camera work. I'll get a shot of another one here on this tank. There's one right, where'd he go? I got to square up to it here. But there's one right there. They're almost like a snail as far as how they look and what they do, but they're much, much slower than snails. And they pretty much stay on the glass. You'll see them on plants here and there, but for the most part, they stay on the glass. And like I said, they don't hurt anything, but when you're trying to film, they do kind of get in the way, and sometimes they'll steal the focus away from whatever object inside the tank I'm trying to film. So they just kind of bother me. Limpets is the name. That is a limpet, a freshwater limpet. So not a huge deal, but those are just kind of some of the happenings that are going on in these Amano shrimp breeding tanks. I figured it would be a good idea to just kind of do a general update to show you and kind of normalize the Amano shrimp breeding tank, because there's really not a lot of people at the current time that have Amano shrimp breeding tanks set up, and it needs to and probably will become the new normal over the rest of 2026 into 2027. as more and more people find out about these crazy new colors of Amano shrimp and how many babies they produce. I talk about it a lot on the channel, but it's because it's true. They stay saddled most of the time. And even while they're pregnant, you can see that one is saddled. And it's possible this yellow one here, that might be her first batch of eggs. These particular shrimp, when I got them, the yellow ones, they're in such high demand that they're shipping them basically as babies. And so I had to wait for them to grow out. And at this point, we've got a buried female there that's full of eggs. We've got this saddled female here that will soon be full of eggs. I believe this might be the female that just released eggs, actually. And then we've got another female right there going across the front that's just got a ton of eggs. So more Amano shrimp than you're going to be able to know what to do with if you start breeding them. So let's take a close look here at the red sun orange. This one's kind of shaded out by that pearlweed there, but it'll give you an idea also of just how many eggs we're dealing with here. Let me get the focus in. I mean, it looks like a big solid blob, but I assure you that's probably easily between 500 and 1,000 eggs there. Pretty crazy. So with these snow Amano shrimp, I like to think of them almost like toys. To me, they look like a glass sculpture of a shrimp. The males especially. See if I can get this male zoomed in on here. But the males especially, because they don't have the eggs or the saddle, they just look like a glass sculpture of an Amano shrimp. They're so perfect looking. So these white Amano shrimp or snow or snowball Amano shrimp are also doing very well. I've got a buried female there that's pregnant with a ton of eggs. And then just above her, it looks like that's probably a male, although the body shape is kind of telling me female. I don't see a saddle or eggs on that one. We've got obviously a saddled female here on that moss dome. And there should be 1, 2, 3, 4. There's one more somewhere in here. Probably on the other side of the sponge filter, if I had to guess. But they're doing great. The pearlweed here, we've got more of a close-up look at it. You can just see how the roots have kind of taken over that sponge filter. And I have no intentions on cleaning that sponge filter. I'm just going to leave it just as it sits. And you can see on the side there of the sponge filter, there are some roots even coming out of the side, as well as some seed shrimp swimming around there towards the top of the side of the sponge filter there. Those seed shrimp love sponge filters. So all this is possible just because there's no predators in the tank, and I feel that not having any fish with your adult Amano shrimp can just keep them a little bit more relaxed. Amano shrimp are fairly bold, and in a lot of cases they'll even steal food from your fish. So I wouldn't say that they're necessarily shy or afraid when they're in a community aquarium setting, but if you have fish that are real persistent, they will sometimes follow the Amano shrimp around. And if you've got some really smart fish, once they figure out the Amano shrimp has all those eggs under them, they'll actually try to get to those eggs, believe it or not. So that just kind of stresses out the shrimp a little bit. I find that it's better just to keep them separated. And then of course, when it comes to your Amano shrimp larva hatching out, as you can imagine, catching the babies in this 2.5 gallon nano tank is 1,000,000 times easier than it would be, say, in this giant 40 gallon here. It's doable to catch a bunch of baby Amano shrimp in a tank like this, but it's tough. And you can use a flashlight to try to kind of get them to congregate to one side of the aquarium, but it is tough. So we'll show some more of this tank here in a minute. It probably has several hundred baby Amano shrimp in there, but When it comes to these breeder tanks that I've got going on here, if you want to try to replicate this kind of setup, by all means, you do not need to do it the way that I do it. You don't need to use a 2.5 gallon aquarium. There's no set amount of gallons that you should use per se. But if you're gonna have more than, you know, 5 Amano shrimp, you probably want to have at least a 5 gallon. I think that I'm kind of pushing the limits just a little bit by having them in a 2.5 gallon and not having it with way more plants than there are in here. If you're looking at any of my older videos, you'll see that there was a ton of Saltwater tang in these breeder tanks, and I have since removed it. And I removed that Saltwater tang mainly because it was making it harder to film the aquariums. So it wasn't anything against the Amano shrimp or against the plant itself, but I have taken that Saltwater tang and added it to these moss domes. So if you see this moss dome here, these 3 moss domes, that's Saltwater tang in the moss dome. And I have no idea how that's gonna grow out. I have a feeling it'll work fine. But typically you would stuff your moss in the moss dome and eventually it grows into like a real thick, kind of a chia pet. All of these I've started within the last few months, so they haven't grown out too much. But this is, I think, Christmas moss. I'm pretty sure it's Christmas moss. And I had that in some of the tanks as well, and it was just kind of taking over the actual substrate of the aquarium, and it was blocking my filming of these shrimp for the videos. So I just took that moss and stuffed it in these moss domes. Now, another thing you can do with the moss domes that's not commonly talked about is putting pearlweed in there. Just like it grows really well on a sponge filter and it'll attach to the sponge filter, you can grow pearlweed in a moss dome just as easily. In this tank, I haven't added any pearlweed to this sponge filter in particular, but it does have a crypt just kind of set back in there. And that crypt was only a few leaves when I put it in there, and it's growing out perfectly because aquatic plants can all feed directly from the water column, so they don't need any kind of substrate. We know that. But overall, the adult shrimp themselves are very easy to maintain and keep healthy. There's no giant list of rules to it. You don't have to have a biology degree to keep a couple of Amano shrimp in a nano tank. You can really, if you want to, you can aquascape it and make it look a little bit more artistic or visually pleasing than what I have going on in these. But my adult breeder tanks here are more utilitarian than anything else, and they're also kind of geared towards filming. But I do have the plants that I have in there for the shrimp to pick through, of course, but also to soak up some of the nutrients from that aqua soil and from the amount of food that I give the shrimp. I don't often find myself in situations where I can really overfeed these shrimp per se. I mean, obviously you could dump a whole bottle of shrimp food in there, it would be too much. But large amounts of food, these shrimp just plow through food. So that's really not an issue for me. It hasn't been an issue. And I do have to wipe down the front glass here and there. I mean, you can kind of see the snail trail on the back glass here. And you'll see the powdered algae on the sides. But overall, it's extremely easy this side of the operation. Now let's get over to the more intimidating sector of breeding Amano shrimp that everyone always talks about, how difficult it is. And you've just got to be so advanced as a shrimp keeper. This is the holy grail, right? So these are my larva tanks. I've got 2 of them. This one down here, there may be 1 or 2 shrimp still in it. I don't think there is. There may be. But this one's not currently in operation. One thing I want you to notice on this little 5 gallon here is if you look at the top, I'll try to get focused in on the top surface here. you'll see there's like an algae growth. Now, I have not been feeding this tank at all. I've harvested, like I said, probably all, maybe one scraggler, two scragglers left in here. But I haven't been feeding this tank now for at least a couple weeks, and most of the surface film is gone. But what remains is some of this algae that grows on the surface, and it's not an issue. It hasn't caused any harm, but it's annoying when I go to harvest the Amano shrimp once they have finished out their larval growth stage, and basically they've turned into little true baby Amano shrimp and they're ready to go back into freshwater. When I go to catch them out of here and there's all that algae on the top, it gets on my net. And that algae originated from my freshwater aquarium. So it's not like that's a special saltwater algae that won't thrive in freshwater. If I get a bunch of that in my other tanks, then I'm gonna have algae in there too. And I prefer to not have whatever that is. So, I mean, obviously I'm still, you know, cross-contaminating things here and there, but if I can cut down on the amount of surface film and surface algae on here, that's something that I'm experimenting with now in this tank here by simply having that Airstone on. And as we look, this is kind of a bottom-up look, so we can actually go a little bit lower and then look up at the surface of the water. And a lot of this stuff that you see floating around in the water there is food from when I fed them earlier today. Having this Airstone in there has helped on the surface film, and from what I can tell, that algae is no longer growing on the surface of the water. So that means once these larvae that you see swimming around in here are turned into baby shrimp and ready to come out, it's just going to be one less thing that I'm worried about when I go to harvest them. Now, the main reason when I started breeding Amano shrimp in the beginning that I did not use an Airstone is because these bubbles pop at the surface of the water and it gets salt water on the underside of the lid. And just like with not wanting algae on my net, I'm really into making things easier for myself and making things as little elbow grease and as little steps as possible. So I like to experiment with doing less, right? I try not to make this something that needs to be really complicated and use microscopes and all this other stuff, right? So I don't want salt water on the underside of my lid. It breaks down that rubber on your lid's hinge. And if you don't have a lid, it gets all over the underside of your light. So what I did is I just took a Deli container lid and I cut the outer rim off of the Deli container lid so that, you know, there was no lip there to hold water that might make it sink down. I cut a hole in the middle of it so it kind of looks like the lid to a drink, you know? And I put that up at the surface of the water. I'll lift you up here and show you kind of a top-down view, if we can, what that looks like. And see how the deli cup lid is just resting on the surface of the water? The bubbles are popping underneath there, so it's no longer spraying all over the place. And so because it's not spraying all over the place, I'm allowing it. I'm keeping an Airstone in here. But does it need an Airstone? No, I've proven that by breeding thousands of Amano shrimp already in a straight no-tech setup, which means there's no Airstone, just light, right? So as far as the light goes, if you're looking to set one of these bad boys up, you do want to use a quality aquarium light, which just means that it shouldn't just have the white and the blue LEDs. It should be like a planted aquarium light that has a full spectrum of color. The one that I'm using is an older version of the Fluval planted light. And so it's definitely a high quality light. And I have no problem, as you can see here, growing algae in this tank. Those are the walls of the tank. The tank itself is pretty clear. There's a little bit of film on the front glass, but you can see the walls of this aquarium have a powdered algae. Now you might be wondering, why does it stop 3/4 of the way up? that's the old water line. So the larvae that are in here are from my yellow female Amano shrimp. And I purposefully reset this tank right before she had her babies because I wanted to only have yellow larvae in here. I'm kind of switching over from concentrating so much on the other two colors because I want to try to get a new color Amano shrimp. And in order to get a new color Amano shrimp, the quickest path is going to be breeding the most yellow to the most yellow. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do. And in order to do that, I had to stop breeding the other two colors for a little while. And I took that time to reset this tank, and to reset it, all I did was just ran some hot water on the inside and kind of wiped it out with my hand. That left a lot of the powdered algae that was here before. So when I filled it back up and put the light back on 24 hours a day, as you can see, the algae grew back pretty quickly. But I started this out with just 5 gallons. It's a 10-gallon aquarium, and I only mixed up 1 bucket of salt water in the beginning because I just didn't feel like mixing up the second one. I told myself I'll do it once she has the babies, and then she had the babies. I put them in here. Then I added another 5 gallons of water or so. Actually, I didn't add all 5 gallons because I didn't want to fill it up all the way to the top because at that time I hadn't added the Deli lid yet. It's a long story, but technically it's probably about 6-7 gallons of water in here. So for this batch of Amano shrimp babies, we'll get a little closer here so you can get a good idea of what they look like. There are some brine shrimp in here with the baby Amano shrimp. And I do that for a couple reasons. The first reason that I keep Amano shrimp and baby brine shrimp together is because it's awesome. And I like to watch the baby brine shrimp swim around. The way they swim around is much cooler to me than how baby Amano shrimp larvae swim around. I'll see if I can, I've got to manually, I think, do this. But let's kind of search through here and find a baby brine shrimp. I think there's 1 adult brine shrimp in here. But I've only got a couple babies in here because I didn't want to overdo it and add so many baby brine shrimp that they're like competing with the Amano shrimp larvae. Here's one. The rest of them I have in a breeder box. I'll show you that here shortly. I thought there was one right here. Yeah, there it is. Okay, coming at us towards the front. Let me zoom in a little more, get my focus under control. And there she is. So that is a small, not an adult, but not a baby. I would call that a juvenile brine shrimp. Culturing brine shrimp is very easy. If you've never heard of sea monkeys, where have you been? When were you born? We all know about sea monkeys, but if you don't, it's a little plastic container. You get some brine shrimp eggs with it. They call them sea monkeys. You add some water, you add a little packet of salt, you get a little tiny thing of what's probably like powdered algae like chlorella or something. In a little tiny spoon, you add your little tiny spoon of algae, and your sea monkeys grow up in that little container with no airstone, no filter, none of that. And you just top off the water. So I like keeping them in here because they're awesome, but also it really drives home what I always say about raising these baby Amano shrimp, which is that it's insanely easy. And the hobby has it wrong when they keep saying that it's difficult. What it is the creator that's making the video has no idea what they're talking about, so they just parrot each other. That's really what it is. Mixing up the salt water is incredibly easy. The instructions are on the bag of salt. So we're not mixing up brackish. That's another thing they get wrong by just copying off each other. And it's not their fault. That's just the way it goes in content creation, right? So it's not their fault. It's not a bad thing, but that's the honest truth as to why you, unless you're a viewer of my channel, probably thought that you would need brackish water because that's what everyone says. Brackish, brackish, brackish. So Can it be done in brackish water? I'm sure it can, but for me personally, I do the full saltwater. So when you buy your marine salt, no, you're not going to use freshwater aquarium salt like you would use to hatch brine shrimp. Believe it or not, the brine shrimp, you need real marine salt to grow them out. They'll hatch in aquarium salt, regular aquarium salt, but you need actual salt water. It's got minerals and stuff in it that they need. But so you just mix up the water to the back of the bag of salt, and you've got to feed them a powdered food. I get into that in my videos. I use my own little specific mixtures of foods, but you can experiment with different fish foods. Just kind of pulverize it up as fine as you can. And what you're going to do is more or less turn this into a Paramecium culture. And if you don't know what Paramecium is, they're just little tiny single-celled dots basically that are already present in all of our aquariums. Yes, they're in your freshwater aquarium. They appear out of thin air. They appear out of dust or something. And if you've ever set up an aquarium, you know a couple days after you set it up, it gets cloudy. It's just part of it. That's Paramecium. If you add a bunch of new hardscape, the water gets cloudy. That's Paramecium. And Paramecium are little single-celled organisms that eat bacteria. So the hobby calls cloudy aquarium water a bacterial bloom, which is kind of true, but you can't really see the bacteria. What you see is that Paramecium. So there's a bunch of that in here just naturally, and it feeds off of the powdered food I put in that gets broken down by bacteria, and it's this whole cycle. But you don't even need to know about any of that. All you got to do is tap some powder in here once a day, and you'll get the hang of it. It's so easy. Trust me, so easy. So we've got a adult down here, and she's kind of like hovering. But this is what I'm talking about, guys. When I say that these brine shrimp are a blast to watch swim around, I mean, look at that thing. Does that not look like some weird alien? It definitely does not look like a monkey. I'll tell you that. But it looks unlike anything else, right? It's got a crazy look to it. I don't have my macro lens on. This is a zoom lens, so we're getting a pretty good picture here in 4K. But they look insane. They look like aliens, and they're very easy to keep. You've probably hatched them out to feed your fish. I've got a video actually on discussing feeding your fish Amano shrimp larva. Perfectly fine thing to do. So anyways, that's the update on the Amano shrimp situation. Now, let's go over here. Before we start looking at that CPD, let me just show you here a breeder box that has water in it, obviously, but it's got salt water from that grow out tank in here. And these brine shrimp were born from that female that's swimming around in that grow out tank. And I pulled them out because I didn't want to have too many brine shrimp in here with those Amano shrimp larvae. So I just pulled these out and stuck them in this breeder box. There's no filter. All of that algae, like this stuff at the bottom, look at that big piece. This is what the bottom of those grow outs look like by the time they get ready to be reset. They're pretty gross on the bottom. And you will see on other channels that breed Amano shrimp, really there's only one main one. He says that if your baby larvae touch the bottom of the aquarium, that the bacteria just take over and eat them. And it's not true. That's not something you need to be worried about. He probably had a die-off that was related to his attempt to feed his Amano shrimp powdered food. And what happens when things die? Well, they get broken down by bacteria, and they typically sink down to the bottom first. But your Amano shrimp are going to be just fine if they touch the bottom, if they touch all of that detritus and algae down there. But what I wanted to showcase here is this is a tiny little breeder box. This is like the small size breeder box that you would buy. I believe it's a Fluval breeder box, the small one. And I don't know how many brine shrimp are in here, but you know, it's not thousands, but the ones that are in here, are living perfectly fine and growing without any water movement at all, without any plants. I mean, technically the algae is a plant, but you don't need complicated situations for these little larvae. You definitely don't need a complicated situation for baby brine shrimp, you know? I think there was actually a couple of Amano shrimp larvae that got caught up in the turkey baster when I put these guys in here. I don't know if we'll be able to see them here. I haven't really checked on this thing very often. But I just put a little bit of powdered food in here once a day, a little tiny bit. And those little shrimpies are doing fine. I'm gonna let them grow up and nature will decide how many make it to adult size. And when they have babies, I'm gonna feed those babies to my nano fish. So let's go over to the 40 gallon here. I've only got one of the lights on, so it's gonna be a little bit dim, but you can see the reflection on the bottom of this aquarium. There's no substrate. And so that's why I put that aqua soil in those adult breeders. Not only that, but it really gives those adult shrimp more to pick at. So you can really see here, all of the detritus kind of gets blown back against the hardscape in here. Kind of a weird angle, so it's not wanting to focus. Let me go straight at it here. So I didn't want the adults tank to have this kind of look to it, but this one is for growing out babies. And so I need to be able to catch them so there's no substrate. Now the color on this red one here in real life is insane. It's not really coming out very well on the camera. I think because of the angle I have this camera at. But you'll notice in here, there are some red Amano shrimp babies. There are some wild type babies, and there are some white babies in here. It's cool stuff. But what I also have in here swimming around are some nano fish. There's one here towards the front of the aquarium. Let me see if I can get focused in on him or her. There she is. So this is a female juvenile Celestial Pearl Danio. Let me tell you a story about these Celestial Pearl Danios. They're a very popular nano fish. When they first came out, they were thought of to be Rasboras. And it was later determined that they're not Rasboras, they are Danio. And there's a lot of people that are breeding them. I myself breed them, obviously. I've got some in here. But what I've noticed breeding these nano fish is they have pretty weak genetics when it comes to inbreeding. It only takes a couple of generations of inbreeding the Celestial Pearl Danios, in my experience, for them to start showing some negative mutations or some deficiencies. And the most common of which that I've noticed have been swim bladder disorder. I had a lot of them that started to grow with kind of a weird body shape. They were kind of like, had dwarfism maybe. Their bodies were just extra short. Crooked spines, a bent tail. When you look straight down at the fish, this is a rice fish, by the way. I'm trying to get you guys some footage of how their eyes glow. It's really, really crazy. So with the Celestial Pearl Danios or Galaxy Rasboras, I started to notice with inbreeding them that I was getting a lot of deficiencies, right? And so it got to the point to where I needed to either introduce some new genetics or just straight up start a new line of CPDs. So I decided I was gonna start a new line. And what I did is I sold off my breeder stock. And if you've ever bred fish, especially nano fish, whenever you sell off your fish, if you don't empty out the aquarium after that, what happens is all the babies start being born that they would normally eat. So in this 40 gallon, I went from having a ton of Celestial Pearl Danios to 0. And then a couple weeks later, it started to completely fill up with babies. And that's the same story with those rice fish. So it just completely started filling up with babies. in here, and I let those babies grow out. And a lot of them did have those same defects that I'm talking about. And that's just from inbreeding. There was some that had some bent tails if you were to look straight down at them. And that's something, if you're looking to get into CPDs, you should check for. And you can only notice it really looking straight down at them. But their body will be straight, their spine is straight, but their tail is crooked, is the best way to really explain that. And like I said, it's only really noticeable from the top down. But the ratio of perfectly healthy, good-looking fish, like this female here is what I would call a perfectly healthy, good-looking female CPD juvenile. She doesn't have any coloration yet, but as far as her body shape goes, the way she's swimming, this would be a holdback if you're trying to just hold back your best fish. And so the problem is, if you've got this fish and her brothers and sisters all in the same tank and you start breeding, that's inbreeding. And it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. Obviously, when you're dealing with like a pond of fish or a lake of fish, all of the fish become related at some point, right? But I've just noticed, and this is just my own personal observation, having used 2 or 3 separate breeding colonies now of CPDs, that they seem genetically weak. So of those babies that were born in that 40-gallon, I noticed this girl here start to get longer fins than the rest. And I didn't want to get my hopes up too much that she was a long fin, because they were still pretty small. Obviously, they're still juveniles. She doesn't have any coloration to her yet either. But you can tell she's obviously a long fin CPD. So being that she's not mature yet, I do have some time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a non-related male CPD to breed her to. And that's called outbreeding. So instead of, let me try to autofocus on her because she's really moving around too much. I'm also going to move the camera up a little bit, point it down a little bit. We'll get her zoomed in. There we go. And then let me adjust this exposure level too for you guys. I apologize, but that's kind of the human part of doing this live, is I've got to work this camera, right? So you can see her long, she disappears there. You can see her long flowing fins. And the long fin gene mutation, what happens is, normally the long fin gene, I'm waiting for her to reappear, just so you guys know. She's going to come out from there eventually. The long fin gene usually tells the fins to stop growing. There's a particular point in time in the fish's growth where the long fin gene tells the fish, stop growing your fins. Basically, that's kind of the layman's way of explaining those genetic mutations. So with the long fin mutation, what happens is, as this fish grows, its fins are never going to stop growing. Now, how long will they get? It just depends on the particular fish, but the fins on this fish are much longer than all of the others. And as it matures, they're going to continue to get longer. So I'm going to breed this fish to a regular, non-related Celestial Pearl Danio male. That's called outbreeding. That should strengthen her genetics. So even though she's coming from, you know, inbred parents, hopefully the better genetics of the non-inbred, at least we hope and we pray that the imported Celestial Pearl Danio that I'll likely have to nurse back to health from the pet store will not be from an inbred stock, although it probably won't be wild caught. Hopefully it'll be closer to a wild CPD than she is. And what you hope for is that that non-related CPD, the genetics of that male fish, cover up the deficiencies in the genetics of this female. And of those babies, most likely none of them will show a longfin mutation like this, but they'll have those genetics in their code. So then I've got to take those babies and breed them back to the mom. I've got to take the best looking male, breed it back to the mom, or technically I can inbred those babies to each other, and I'm probably going to do both. And that should result in 50% or so of the babies having this longfin mutation, and then from there you would breed 2 longfins together and just try to stabilize the line. Now, what I personally believe, and this is just me being an experienced Celestial Pearl Danio breeder of several years now, having bred thousands and thousands and thousands of these guys, right? What I believe, knowing that their genetics are already weak, is I kind of think that it can be stabilized, but then you end up with kind of a weaker stock. So although they have beautiful long flowy fins, there's just a lot of genetic throwbacks. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I hope I can stabilize it and with some outbreeding, be able to stabilize not having genetic defects. And, you know, a lot of breeders of CPDs, they don't even look straight down at the fish to see if the tail is crooked or not. I think that's a genetic defect that kind of gets overlooked quite a few times. But overall, this is going to be a long-term project because she's still got several weeks to go before she matures. And so that means that even if we had the male, the unrelated male to breed her to, you know, it's going to be weeks and weeks and weeks for babies to be born and grow to a size that they can be bred back, etc., etc. But that's how any project gets started. You know, there has to be that first little turn of the gear. And so that's what we're going to be working on, in addition to hopefully a new color of Amano shrimp. I really hope I can get a green or a blue out of these yellows. That's exactly how Neocaridina shrimp originally were made into the colors that we see today. And genetically, the yellow, in my own studies, I believe the yellow to be the pathway of new colors of Amano shrimp. So if you disagree with that, or if you want to talk about that, by all means, leave a comment on the video. I have all my videos set to approve all, so that means that I see the comments on the back end, but you won't see them publicly, but I do see them all. And I do appreciate all the support you guys have for what I'm doing. I've had a lot of people tell me that they're so grateful that someone's showing that there's a way to do this that's not rocket science. And, you know, I really appreciate that. And at the same time, you guys got to understand that it's kind of self-serving. You know, I don't want to do this in a complicated way. If it really took microscopes and hours and hours and hours of time to breed Amano shrimp, I wouldn't do it. So it's only because I've experimented with these low-tech methods and have such good success that I continue to do it, you know. But my plan with sharing all of this with you is so that you also do it. I do not want to be the only guy doing this. I want this to be normal on YouTube. I want for there to be a lot of people breeding Amano shrimp. I want every pet store to have red Amano shrimp like this. I want you to be able to walk into your local pet store and they say, do you want red Amano shrimp? Do you want the white ones that are hiding under that sponge filter? Or do you want the yellow Amano shrimp? As of right now, that's not something that really happens. Your local dealer most likely can't even get these because there's only like 1 or 2 people breeding them in the entire world, right? So I want to end the colorful Amano shrimp drought. And although I'm appreciative for overseas breeders and farms, they've made the hobby what it is today. We in America, or in whatever country you're in, as hobbyists, if you're going to own these shrimp, they're going to breed all on their own in your aquarium. So they're going to make those babies, and those baby larvae are going to get released into your freshwater aquarium. And so it's really up to you if you want to take the time to simply mix up some salt water and throw them in there or not. I can tell you that if I can do this, I promise you can do it better. So hey, as always, I appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit that like button, and we'll see you in the next one.